The sky was overcast when Isabel Reed pulled the car into the cracked driveway of 421 Waverly Street. The gravel crunched beneath the tires like old bones, familiar and jarring all at once. In the passenger seat, Jonah looked up from his phone and stared at the pale blue house. The shutters hung unevenly. The porch sagged on one side. Yet the curtains were still drawn like someone was inside, watching. Isabel cut the engine and rested her hands on the steering wheel longer than necessary. Her eyes didn't blink. She hadn't blinked much since the call came last Thursday. Just a voice on the line. Your mother has passed. No signs of foul play. Found in the tub. No next of kin but you. Isabel didn't ask how long she'd been there. She already knew. Jonah opened the door first, slamming it harder than he meant to. Is this really it? Isabel nodded. This is it. She stepped out, the air smelling of wet leaves and something older, dust and soap and lilies, maybe. It was the smell of Agnes Reed, preserved like mothballs in her memory. She walked to the porch with a box of keys in her hand, but when she reached the door, it creaked open on its own. Unlocked. Creepy, Jonah mumbled behind her. Just old, she said. Inside, the air was still. Furniture sat where it had always been. The floral couch, the armoire, the thin carpet that always curled at the edges, no matter how many times Agnes had pressed it flat. A mug sat on the kitchen counter, half full of moldy tea. The sink dripped once, then again. Jonah hovered in the doorway. Did someone clean up after it happened? No one's been here, Isabel said, walking in like a stranger in her own past. He watched her fingers trail the edge of the table, touch the back of a chair, hover near the doorway to the hallway. The hallway led to the bathroom. She didn't look that way. Not yet. The funeral had been yesterday. Just 3 people came. A priest who didn't know her name, a woman from the neighborhood who offered store-bought cookies, and a man from the funeral home who forgot to bring flowers. Isabel hadn't cried. Not once. Jonah watched her closely, waiting for something to snap or fall apart. But all she said afterward was, "We should get going before the rain starts." Now here they were. Jonah picked up a photo frame from the mantel. A baby in a stroller, a woman frowning beside her. Is this you? Isabel glanced at it. Yes. You don't look very happy. I probably wasn't. He put the frame down. Why didn't we ever come here before? Isabel walked toward the back room. Because I left for a reason. He followed slowly, stepping over a squeaky floorboard. She didn't call, not even when Grandpa died. She didn't call when you were born either. She didn't know? Isabel turned and looked at him, her face unreadable. She knew. Jonah fell silent. In the kitchen, Isabel opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of mail. Unpaid bills, catalogs, one unopened letter addressed to her in her mother's shaky handwriting. She slipped it into her coat pocket without comment. I'll go check the upstairs, she said. Jonah looked hesitant. Do you want me to? No, stay here. Maybe open the windows. He nodded and watched her go. The stairs groaned under her feet like they remembered her weight. Each step echoed a memory. The time she fell and split her chin. The night she tried to run away with only a flashlight and a granola bar. The Sunday mornings when Agnes would play piano, always the same 3 hymns. Upstairs, the hallway smelled like lavender and something metallic. The bathroom door was shut. She stopped in front of it. Her fingers hovered near the knob, but she didn't open it. Instead, she turned to her old bedroom. It looked almost the same. Pale pink walls, a wooden bed frame, a bookshelf half filled with yellowing paperbacks. Her old lamp still worked when she turned it on. The light flickered once before settling. On the desk sat a notebook. She opened it. Empty pages. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The room felt untouched, as if her mother had kept it waiting, not in love or longing, but in possession, like a frozen exhibit of a daughter who never quite belonged. She felt the tightness in her chest, not grief exactly, but something harder, like swallowing a stone that never dissolved. Downstairs, she heard Jonah opening a window. A burst of fresh air swept through the hallway. Dust danced in the sunlight. caught in golden beams like memories trying to take shape. She closed the notebook and whispered into the stillness, "I'm not here to forgive you." From somewhere in the house, the sound of something falling. A book? A photo frame? Jonah called out, "Mom?" "I'm fine," she called back, though her pulse had quickened. The floor creaked beneath her feet as she stood. In the mirror, her face looked older than it had this morning. The house did that, etched years into the skin with every passing second. Isabel walked back into the hallway. She stared again at the bathroom door. One step closer, then another. She pressed her ear to the wood, held her breath. Nothing. The doorknob turned. It wasn't locked. Inside, everything was spotless. The tub gleamed. The towels were folded. The mirror was fogless. No water stains, no sign of death. As if someone had come and cleaned it after the body was taken. As if the house had done it itself. She turned off the light, stepped back, and closed the door quietly. That night, Isabel didn't sleep. She lay in the living room on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Jonah slept in the guest room, his headphones on. The house whispered, groaned, remembered. She whispered back, not sure to whom, "It's just a house." But the walls knew, and they weren't ready to forget. Let me know if you'd like to continue to Chapter 2, Keys That Don't Fit, or if you'd like an image prompt or audio narration style too. The one that had always stuck, even when Agnes used to curse it with a wooden spoon in hand. Isabel had tried opening it on her first night back, but it refused to budge. She hadn't touched it since. But this morning, it was open, just slightly, like something inside had pushed from within. Isabel stood over it in silence, the sunlight barely filtering through the dust-stained curtains. She reached out and tugged it open all the way. Inside, there was nothing but a single brass key on a faded ribbon. She held it in her palm. The ribbon was brittle. The key was warm. Jonah entered the room, yawning, rubbing his eyes. "Did you open that?" "No," Isabel answered too quickly. They both stared at the drawer. That night, the clock on the mantel, an antique with tarnished gold hands that had never worked since Isabel was 10, ticked once. At 12:01 a.m., then again, and again. Isabel sat upright on the couch, her breath caught. She watched the second hand move smoothly, then halt completely at 12:06. Then silence. She didn't sleep after that. Instead, she walked through the house barefoot, listening to the creaks under her steps and the cold quiet that lived between the walls. The house didn't feel empty. It felt inhabited. By time, by memory, by something unnamed. The dreams came later. They weren't violent. They were worse than that. She was 5. Sitting at the kitchen table, watching Agnes slice apples with the same knife she used for everything. Her hands moved in clean, perfect cuts. The light in the room was too bright. Isabel tried to speak, but the voice that came out was Agnes's. "Eat it before it turns brown," Agnes said. Then she was 10, standing at the top of the stairs in a red dress. Someone was crying in the bathroom. Isabel walked toward the sound. Her own hands trembled, but they weren't small hands. They were Agnes's hands. The dream shifted again. Now she was in the basement, sweeping dust into her mouth instead of the floor. Then her reflection in the washer's chrome door moved when she didn't. When she woke, she was standing in her old bedroom, clutching a screwdriver. The floorboard beneath her was partly pried up. She didn't remember getting there. Jonah stood in the doorway, alarmed. "Mom? What are you doing?" She looked at the floorboard, her breath shaky. "I don't know." But she knelt anyway and continued. The nails groaned as she worked them loose. The board lifted with a reluctant sigh. Beneath it was a small iron box wrapped in flannel. She pulled it out, heart pounding. It was cold. Her fingers trembled as she peeled the cloth away, etched on the lid, in precise, unmistakable handwriting, "Isabel R." Jonah stepped forward. "Did she leave you something?" Isabel didn't answer. She tried the key from the hallway drawer. It didn't fit. "Maybe it's just coincidence," Jonah offered, watching her fumble with it again. "Lots of old houses have locked boxes and weird keys." "Not with my name on them," Isabel whispered. The clock ticked again downstairs. She looked at the boy beside her, her son, growing taller by the day, and wondered how much she should tell him. About Agnes, about the silence that lived in this house like a permanent tenant, about the time she'd tried to run away barefoot and ended up locked in the attic, no food, no water, just Agnes outside the door saying, "You'll come out when you're grateful." But Isabel didn't say any of it. She only held the box tighter. That evening, she left the house and walked to the shed behind the garden. Agnes used to keep tools there, old rusted ones. Isabel rummaged through the shelves and found a tiny metal file. She sat on the wooden bench just outside and began trying to file the edge of the key. From the window upstairs, Jonah watched her. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but her lips were moving. Her hands worked with calm desperation, like unlocking this box was the only thing keeping her anchored. Inside the house, the lights flickered. The drawer in the hallway slid shut on its own. When Isabel came back in, she was shivering. The key still didn't fit. She placed the box on the table and stared at it until the sun rose. In the silence between breaths, she swore she heard her mother's voice. "Some things aren't meant to be opened, but you always were a curious girl." And Isabel whispered back, "I'm not that girl anymore." But the box remained, waiting, and the key in her pocket pulsed, ever so faintly, like it remembered. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 3, The Woman in the Photo? It was on the second afternoon when Isabel finally opened the bookcase in the living room, more out of avoidance than purpose. She had meant to keep sorting the things in the attic, but something in her stomach turned every time she neared the stairs. So she stayed downstairs instead, running her fingers along the spines of old books she hadn't seen since childhood. Leaves of Grass, The Bell Jar, a brittle collection of psalms, and a small red leather-bound journal that didn't belong. When she tugged it free, a photo slipped out. It fluttered to the floor face down. She picked it up slowly. The image was in black and white, yellowed around the corners. Her mother, Agnes, stood barefoot in a dirt yard, pregnant. Her hands cradled her stomach. She was young, younger than Isabel had ever seen her in life. But what struck her more was the man standing beside her. He wasn't her father. At least. Not the man in the only photo Isabel remembered, one in uniform, folded and faded, that sat in a drawer somewhere. This man had long hair, a half smile, and his arm around Agnes like they were a couple. Isabel turned the photo over. On the back in Agnes's familiar cursive, Waverly, August 1979. Me plus J, just before. Just before what? Isabel stared at the date. She was born in November that year. She sank into the armchair and stared at the photo for a long time. Something in her chest felt misplaced, like her organs had shifted under her ribs. She reached for her phone and hesitated, then dialed. Clara answered after 2 rings. "Hey, how's the house?" "Still haunted?" Isabel said flatly. "Can you come over?" Clara didn't ask questions. She said she'd be there in 20. When she arrived, Clara brought coffee and a file folder. "I started looking into the house deed," she said, slipping off her shoes. "Did you know it was in Agnes's name since 1975? No mention of your dad. I thought maybe." Isabel handed her the photo. Clara fell quiet. "That's not the man in the newspaper," Clara murmured. "The one who died. The car crash." "I know. Who's Jay?" Isabel looked toward the window. "That's what I'm afraid to find out." They searched through the books together. Another photo, no. Letters, no. A paper tucked in the back of a hymnal read only, "Redemption comes by silence." Agnes' cryptic style again. It was Jonah who called them later from upstairs. "Mom, you might want to see this." They climbed the stairs and found him sitting cross-legged on the floor of the attic, beside a stack of cardboard boxes. In his hand, a cassette tape. It was in a shoebox marked Christmas '81, he said, under the fake wreath. Isabel took the tape and read the handwritten label, 1979 for IR. Her initials. Her stomach dropped. Clara blinked. "That's the year you were born." They found the old cassette player in Agnes's bedroom closet. still plugged in, as if waiting. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed and pressed play. The tape clicked, hissed, then a voice, soft, cracked, hesitant. To my daughter, if you ever find this, I hope you never do. But if you are listening, then the house didn't work, and I need to tell you something that no one else will. Jonah sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. Clara's hand tightened over her mug. The voice continued, "There was someone before your father. He knew too much. He wanted to take you away from me. Said I was sick. Said the house was cursed. But the house was safe. It was always safe until he came." Silence. Then the tape cut off abruptly. No explanation, no name, no second side. Isabel stared at the player, her breath shallow. "Your father," Clara said gently, "was supposed to have died in a car crash, right?" Isabel nodded. "But I don't remember the crash. I don't remember the funeral. I remember Agnes locking me in my room and saying, 'We'll be fine. He was never going to stay.'" Clara placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were 5. Jonah stood and whispered, "Do you think she killed him?" The room fell cold. Isabel didn't answer. She picked up the photo again. The man's smile seemed to shift under the lamplight, like he wanted to speak, to warn her. Downstairs, the hallway drawer opened again, this time all the way. Inside, something else had appeared. A second cassette. No label. Just a faint red ribbon tied around it, just like the one on the key. Isabel looked down at her palms. They were shaking. Clara whispered, "Are you okay?" She shook her head. "No, but I think I'm ready." And somewhere beneath the floorboards, the house seemed to exhale, like it had been holding its breath for 40 years. Shall I continue to chapter 4, Ashes and Apples, next? The cassette player clicked once before the tape began to roll, its whirring sound louder in the quiet of the room. Isabel sat alone in the attic, the afternoon light slanting through the dust-coated window. She had cleaned the old space just enough to breathe in it, though the air was heavy with mothballs and mold and memory. The tape started with static, then the gentle hum of a lullaby. A woman's voice, off-key, fragile, singing a melody Isabel hadn't heard since childhood. Her throat tightened. The song slipped into silence, broken only by the sound of breathing. Then the voice came. "I don't know if this will ever reach you, Isabel," Agnes began, her tone cracked, whispery, as if she were hiding from someone in the very room she recorded it. "But if it does, it means I'm gone, and maybe that's the only way you'll listen." Isabel's eyes fluttered closed. "I did what I had to?" Agnes said, "There are things a mother carries until her body gives out. Things you tuck between your bones so no one else can feel them." The tape buzzed slightly. Isabel's hands clenched in her lap. "You never knew how it felt," Agnes continued, "to hold one child's hand while burying the other. You think I was cruel. Maybe I was. But cruelty is a coat you wear when grief turns to rot." Click. The lullaby returned briefly. The tape stopped. Isabel didn't move. Her face was still, but the tear that traced her cheek betrayed her. She didn't wipe it away. She just sat there, letting the silence settle again. Downstairs, a knock at the door jolted her. Jonah was still at the store. She hadn't expected anyone. She stood, bones aching, and made her way down. When she opened the door, the man on the porch was both familiar and strange. Eli Monroe. Taller, older, softer in the face, but his eyes hadn't changed. They were still that stormy blue-gray, restless like ocean water under wind. "I saw your car," he said, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "Didn't think you'd actually come back." "Neither did I." He looked past her shoulder at the house's dark interior. "Still smells like dust and apples." "It hasn't changed." Eli tilted his head. "Neither have you." Isabel stepped aside, her mouth uncertain. "Come in." He hesitated only a second before entering. The floor creaked under his boots. He looked around like someone revisiting the scene of a memory too sharp to touch. "You staying long?" he asked. "I haven't decided." They sat in the kitchen. She made tea out of habit, not really wanting it. Eli watched her movements with a gentleness that made her uneasy. "I went to the funeral," he said finally. "Stood in the back. You didn't see me." "I didn't see anyone." He smiled sadly. She was a hard woman. She was something, Isabel muttered. They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping tea they didn't taste. You know, Eli said, glancing at the window, I used to think this house was haunted. It is, he laughed softly. Still dramatic. No, she said, serious now. I mean it. He didn't mock her. He just looked at her a little longer. Isabel, what did she do to you? Isabel shook her head. It's not just what she did, it's what she left. Later that night, Jonah returned just as the light faded behind the houses. He placed the groceries on the table and noticed a pair of boots near the door. We have company? He called out. In the living room, Isabel said. Her voice was warmer but tired. Jonah stepped in to find her talking quietly with Eli. Something about them made him stop in the doorway. He hadn't seen his mother smile like that before. Not wide, but soft, like she remembered a version of herself that wasn't always carrying invisible weight. He didn't interrupt. Hours passed. The wind picked up outside. Isabel and Eli spoke long into the night about the past, about the town, about how no one ever really leaves a place like Waverly Street. Just pretends to. By midnight, Eli left. Isabel watched him walk to his car under the porch light, his silhouette blurred by fog. She stood on the steps long after the engine started and faded away. Jonah couldn't sleep. He tossed in the creaky bed, something pressing on his chest. At one point, he gave up and opened his bedroom door. The hallway was dim, only the faint light from the downstairs kitchen casting an eerie glow up the staircase. Then he saw her, a woman, standing at the end of the hallway, wearing a faded floral dress, her hair curled in loose waves, her hands pale at her sides. She wasn't his mother. She wasn't moving. She wasn't quite real. Jonah froze. Mom? He whispered, but the woman didn't respond. She turned slowly, soundlessly, and stepped into the bathroom. The door shut behind her. Jonah backed into his room and slammed the door. Downstairs, Isabel sat on the couch, holding the tape in her hand. She was thinking of ashes, the kind in urns and the kind in her chest. And she was thinking of apples, the way they fell, the way some of them never made it off the tree before rotting from the inside. She didn't sleep that night either. Neither did the house. Shall I continue with Chapter 5? The room no one slept in? The next morning, Isabel stood in front of the guest room door, staring at it as if it were a locked vault holding something sacred or dangerous. She had avoided this room since the day she arrived, even as she cleaned and wandered the house. It was the only room Agnes kept sealed tight, always claiming it was for guests who never came. Isabel knew no one had ever slept in there. Not when she was little, not when relatives visited, not even when the house had too many people and too few beds. Now, the door creaked open with a soft groan, as if sighing after decades of silence. Inside, the air was stale but not cold. The curtains were drawn, letting in filtered morning light that turned the dust into golden flakes. Everything was arranged with careful precision, the way Agnes liked everything. A small crib stood by the window, painted white with peeling edges. A mobile hung above it, faded moons and stars barely swaying. Isabel stepped in, her foot sinking slightly into the plush pink carpet. On the far side of the room was a dresser with a row of porcelain animals lined along the top. She remembered them, vaguely. A rabbit, a lamb, a tiny bear with a chipped ear. The closet door was open a crack. She walked to it and pulled it wider. Baby clothes hung neatly, tiny dresses, soft cardigans, booties lined in lace. Most had never been worn. Some still had tags. The scent of old fabric mixed with a faint perfume, the one her mother used to wear, sweet and bitter at the same time. She closed her eyes, and in that moment it felt like the room shifted. The air thickened. The silence turned into a hum. She was small again, a little girl sitting on the floor watching her mother fold a blanket. "Don't touch anything in here, Isabel," Agnes said. "This room is special." "Whose room is it?" she had asked. Agnes didn't answer, just pulled the door shut behind her. Isabel blinked. She was back in the present, Her hands shook slightly as she moved to the dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside, she found a leather-bound journal, aged with the corners curled. No lock, no title, but on the inside cover was a name in Agnes' sharp, slanted handwriting. To Ivy, with all the pieces of my heart. Isabel sat on the edge of the bed and opened the book. The first page was a letter. Ivy, I don't know if this is right, but I need to tell someone. And you're the only one I can speak to without being judged, without being told I'm crazy. You were here, and then you weren't, and something inside me never stopped aching. The writing continued, page after page. It was not a journal of daily life, but a series of confessions, scattered thoughts, moments preserved in ink like bones in a museum. Isabel doesn't remember you. Maybe that's a blessing. She was too young. But I see you in her sometimes. In the way she cries in her sleep, in the way she stares at nothing for too long. Isabel's breath hitched. She kept reading. I tried to keep your things clean, just in case. They said I should let go, that it wasn't healthy. But how do you let go of someone who still visits you in your dreams? Her hands trembled. She flipped to the middle of the book. They said you died peacefully. They lied. You didn't die peacefully. You cried, I heard you. But I was too tired. I'd been up all night with Isabel. I thought I could rest for a moment, just one moment. And when I woke up, the sentence stopped there. Isabel closed the journal gently, as if it could break. She sat still for a long time, listening to her heartbeat, to the creaks of the house, to the faint sound of Jonah downstairs opening the fridge, unaware of the earthquake unfolding just above him. Ivy. A name never spoken. A sister never mentioned. A child never grieved properly. Was she a twin? Was she born first or second? Isabel couldn't remember, or maybe she blocked it out. The mind does strange things when it's trying to survive. She stood and walked to the crib, ran her fingers along the edge. Something rattled beneath the mattress. She pulled it up, a music box, old, wooden. She wound it slowly. The tune was the same lullaby from the cassette. She let it play until the final note hung in the air like smoke. That night, Isabel didn't tell Jonah. She didn't call Eli. She didn't even write anything down. She simply sat in the sealed room, now unsealed, and looked at everything with new eyes. Jonah knocked on the door later. You okay? I'm here, she said. Can I come in? She hesitated, then said, Not yet. He stood on the other side for a moment, then walked away. The light from the hallway cast a sliver of gold into the room. Isabel sat in the rocking chair near the crib, holding the journal to her chest. And somewhere in the silence, just beneath it, she thought she heard a baby sigh. And the smell of apples filled the air again. Not fresh, not rotten, just remembered. Would you like to continue with Chapter 6, A Funeral Inside the Walls? The air was thick with fog when Isabel parked outside the Municipal Records Building, a narrow, gray-bricked structure tucked behind the post office. The morning felt reluctant to begin, as if even the sun didn't want to rise on what she might uncover. She hadn't told Jonah where she was going. She'd left a note by his cereal bowl, gone for errands, locked the door, and slipped out before he woke. The building's interior was silent, except for the slow ticking of a clock above the clerk's desk. Isabel gave her name and Agnes Reed's date of death. The woman behind the counter nodded, indifferent, and disappeared into the back. Minutes later, she returned with a thin beige file folder. These are the only documents under that household prior to 1980, she said. Isabel thanked her and took a seat by the window. The folder contained property documents, a water bill from 1979, and a birth certificate, Isabel Reed, born January 8, 1978. She flipped to the next page. Another certificate, Ivy Reed, born January 8, 1978. Same hospital, same attending nurse, twins. Her hands gripped the page as though it might vanish. She read the next line. Date of death, March 17, 1978. Cause, unexplained respiratory failure, infant deceased at home, death certificate pending, burial not documented. The paper stopped there. No funeral, no burial permit, No cemetery record. Isabel sat back in the hard chair, staring at the document as if it might change under her gaze. Her chest felt hollow, as though someone had scooped out a part of her with their bare hands. She realized she wasn't breathing properly. She folded the papers carefully and slid them into her bag. As she stood to leave, she caught her reflection in the dusty glass of the front door. Her face looked older than it had yesterday. She drove back in silence, the road narrowing as she approached Waverly Street, as if pulling her into itself. The house came into view, looking more fragile than before. Jonah was on the porch, feeding crusts of bread to the crows that had started gathering on the fence. He looked up and saw her face. He didn't ask anything. He just nodded and went inside. Isabel stayed outside for a while. Inside the house, the temperature felt wrong. Not cold exactly, but off. She walked straight to the sealed guest room and opened it again. The crib stood where she'd left it. The journal sat closed on the dresser. She sat in the rocking chair and pressed her hands to her face. Then, something clicked in her mind. The nursery, the dresser, the closet. But what about the walls? The word burial echoed in her head. Not documented. She stood suddenly, moved to the far corner of the room where the wallpaper had always curled. She remembered this. Agnes yelling at her as a child for picking at it. It had seemed such a strange thing to rage over. Now, with fingers trembling, she pulled the edge again. It peeled back easily, revealing wood beneath, then something else. A thin, sealed panel nailed over the drywall. It looked newer than the rest. She grabbed a screwdriver from the basement. Her hands shook as she pried the panel loose. Behind it, packed into the cavity between the walls, was a small, wrapped bundle. Her breath caught. It was a cloth, a yellow baby blanket, faded and dirty, tied around what looked like a wooden box. The scent hit her instantly. Not rot, not decay, but lavender. That same too-sweet perfume. Isabel slid the bundle out with both hands and set it gently on the floor. She didn't open it immediately. She sat beside it, staring. And then it happened. A memory came, not like a flash, but a slow immersion. She was 4, maybe 5. In the hallway, clutching her doll, peering into the nursery, Agnes was kneeling by the wall, crying, whispering, rocking back and forth. "You were always the quiet one after Ivy left," she said aloud to no one. "So good, so still." Then Agnes turned and saw her. "You have to be quiet too," she hissed. "She's sleeping. She'll wake if you make a sound." Isabel remembered running, remembered the chill, remembered nothing after that. Back in the present, Isabel finally opened the cloth. Inside was a small wooden box with hand-carved initials. IR, no bones, no ashes. Just a faded photo of 2 babies sleeping in a bassinet side by side, one in pink, one in yellow, and a lock of hair tied with ribbon. Isabel pressed her forehead to the box. There were no tears, only a weight, a funeral with no mourners, a body never laid to rest, a name never spoken. That night, she sat at the dining table and told Jonah everything. He listened in silence, his eyes wide but not frightened. "So she was real?" he asked. "Yes. Did you love her?" "I never got the chance." Jonah reached across the table and placed his hand on hers. "We'll give her that now," he said. The next morning, they buried the box beneath the old apple tree in the backyard, just the 2 of them. No ceremony, no priest, no flowers. Isabel placed a single stone over the patch of earth. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The wind picked up, the branches above them swayed gently, and for the first time, the house felt quiet, truly quiet, as if someone had finally been allowed to rest. Shall we move forward to Chapter 7? Clara's house? Clara's wounds? Isabel hadn't planned to go next door, but that afternoon, after the burial beneath the apple tree and a silence in the house that felt more charged than peaceful, she found herself standing on Clara Monroe's porch, fingers hesitating above the old brass doorbell. The wood beneath her shoes creaked softly, just like it had when they were girls running between the houses, back when everything was smaller and faster and easier to forget. Clara opened the door before she rang. "I saw you from the kitchen," she said. Her voice was gentle but tired, the voice of someone who'd waited years for a conversation that never came. "I thought you might come." Isabel nodded once, then stepped inside. The house smelled different from hers, warmer, lived in. Plants lined the windowsill, a kettle whistled faintly in the background, and a cat dozed on the arm of a faded sofa. Clara led her to the kitchen, where 2 mugs were already set out. "I made ginger tea," she said. "You used to like it." Isabel sat, hands wrapping the mug for warmth. She didn't speak at first. She just stared at the steam rising between them. "I found her journal," she finally said. "Agnes. She wrote letters to someone named Ivy." Clara didn't flinch. She only looked down at her tea. "Ivy was your sister," she said softly. "I know now." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "She didn't die at the hospital, did she?" Isabel shook her head. "She died at home. No funeral. My mother buried her in the walls. Not literally, but close." "I thought so," Clara whispered. "I never saw her after that day." "You saw her?" Clara looked up, her eyes shining. "I did," she said. "Not her face, not clearly, but I heard her. After she died, I would hear crying coming from that room. You'd already stopped talking much. Your mother started acting like she was listening to someone invisible. Sometimes I saw bruises on her arms, fingernail marks, like she was fighting something." Isabel felt her skin go cold. "You told someone?" "I was 10, Isabel. I told my mom once. She told me not to gossip about the dead, said grief makes people strange." Isabel nodded slowly. "She wasn't just cruel," she murmured. "She was grieving a ghost." Clara reached out and touched Isabel's hand. "I think she loved you in her own broken way, but you reminded her of the one she lost." They sat there for a while, not talking, just holding the weight of all those unspoken years between them. When Isabel returned home, the sky had gone pale with early evening. The house looked smaller somehow, though nothing had changed. She found Jonah in the living room, curled on the couch with a blanket. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I think I walked around last night, in my sleep." "You sleepwalked?" "Yeah." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I woke up standing in front of the guest room door." Isabel felt her throat tighten. "You didn't go in, did you?" "I don't remember." She sat beside him, brushing his hair back like she used to when he was little. "Maybe we need a break from this house." Jonah didn't answer. He leaned into her side. That night, Isabel couldn't sleep. She sat in her old bedroom, the journal open on her lap. The entries blurred together now, her mother's grief unraveling in fragments. There were passages that repeated themselves, names scribbled in the margins. Ivy, Isabel, Ivy Bell. One line kept echoing, "She wouldn't leave, even when I begged her to." The floor creaked. Isabel looked up, expecting Jonah, but no one was there. She stood slowly and stepped into the hallway. The lights flickered. At the end of the corridor, the guest room door stood wide open. Her pulse quickened. She walked toward it, barefoot, the wood cool under her feet. Inside, the mobile above the crib was spinning. No wind, no open window. She stood in the doorway, heart pounding. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. The room was still, but then she heard it, a faint shuffle. She turned sharply, just in time to see Jonah standing behind her, eyes open but blank, his face pale. "Jonah?" she breathed, reaching out. He blinked, confused. "Mom? You were sleepwalking again." I was dreaming of water," he said softly, "of someone calling my name from the tub." Isabel's breath caught. "I think the house is trying to say something," she murmured. Jonah looked up at her. "Then maybe you need to listen." They stood there together, the night pressing in around them, the walls breathing quietly, like they too were waiting for something long buried to finally come to light. "Would you like me to continue with Chapter 8, Jonah's Secret?" It was raining when Jonah finally told her. Not a loud storm, just a soft, steady rain that blurred the windows and made the house feel like it was drifting at sea. Isabel was in the kitchen, staring blankly at the stove, a half-boiled kettle forgotten behind her. She hadn't slept the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the guest room door swinging open again and again, always revealing something new. Shadows, a cradle rocking by itself, a lullaby humming from nowhere. Jonah entered the kitchen slowly, holding something in his hand. It was small and black, a cassette. Not the one they'd listened to together, a second one. He set it gently on the table and waited for her to notice. Isabel turned, frowning. "What's that?" "I found it 2 days ago," Jonah said quietly. "Under the floorboards in the guest room. I didn't know if I should show you." "Why now?" "Because I listened to it last night," he said, and there was a crack in his voice. "And I think we're not safe." Isabel didn't move for a moment. Then she reached for the old cassette player and gently inserted the tape. The room filled with static. Then Agnes' voice again, shakier this time, almost frantic. "If someone's hearing this," she began, "then it means you've stayed too long." Isabel gripped the edge of the counter. "Ivy never left," Agnes whispered. "She stayed in the house, first in the walls, then in the crib, and then in you." Isabel's face went pale. "I know what they said," Agnes continued, "that grief makes people see things. But grief didn't make the toys move at night. Grief didn't make Isabel scream in her sleep or wake up with scratches she couldn't explain. Grief didn't lock the doors from the inside. Ivy did." A long silence followed, filled only by breathing. "I tried to fix it. I thought if I could keep her close, she'd be at peace. But she doesn't want peace. She wants to be known. She wants to be seen." Then came a sound, muffled, distant, something like crying, then banging. Agnes screamed faintly, and then, click. The tape ended. Isabel stood frozen, hands shaking, her mind spinning. She couldn't speak. She felt her knees buckle before she realized she was falling. Jonah caught her. "Mom," he said, panic in his voice. "Mom, breathe." She gasped, covering her mouth, the weight of all the pieces crashing into her at once. The journal, the photo, the grave under the tree, the woman in the hallway, the lullabies, the sleepwalking. Ivy had never left. Jonah helped her to the couch. She curled into herself like a child. He called Clara. 10 minutes later, Clara was there, kneeling in front of Isabel, holding her wrists. "You need to rest," Clara said firmly. "I can't," Isabel whispered. "What if she..." "You've been awake too long. You're not thinking clearly. You don't need to fight this house alone." Isabel closed her eyes. Her body gave in. She slept for the first time in days, dreamless and deep. That night, the house was unusually quiet, until Jonah woke up again. He sat up in bed, staring at the ceiling. A light, dim golden, was glowing above him. Not in his room, in the attic. He slipped out of bed and crept down the hallway. The stairs to the attic had always groaned under weight, but tonight, they were silent as he climbed. He reached the door at the top. The light shone from beneath the crack. He opened it. The attic was warm, still. Dust floated in the glow from a single bulb hanging from the rafters. He stepped inside. There was nothing unusual at first, just old boxes, a broken chair, and the faint smell of wood and lavender. But then he noticed a section of the far wall. It was different. The boards there were a lighter color, like they'd been replaced recently. A patch of the wall was uneven, bulging slightly outward. He reached for a crowbar from the nearby shelf. Downstairs, Clara stirred in her chair beside Isabel. Something in her chest tightened. Upstairs, Jonah pressed the crowbar into the panel. It cracked once, then again, then it gave. Behind the wall was a hollow, and inside it, a box. A small wooden trunk nailed shut. No markings, no dust, as if it had been placed there not years ago, but days. Jonah didn't open it. He backed away slowly. From the stairs, Clara's voice echoed up. "Jonah? I'm here," he called back. "I found something." She came up slowly, flashlight in hand. When she saw the wall, her breath caught. "Go get your mom," she said softly. "But now." Jonah hesitated, then ran. Clara stood before the box, unmoving. The air around it felt tight, charged. Not evil, but desperate. Like something had been waiting. Moments later, Isabel appeared in the attic doorway, her face still pale from sleep, but clearer now. She looked at the box, then at Clara. "What is it?" she asked. "I don't know," Clara said, "but it wants to be seen." And for the first time, Isabel didn't feel afraid, just ready. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 9, Bones and Letters? The attic was silent as Isabel knelt before the wooden trunk. Clara stood a step behind her, flashlight lowered but steady, casting shadows that danced along the beams. Jonah waited by the doorway, arms crossed tight over his chest, watching his mother with a mixture of fear and awe. Isabel ran her fingers across the lid. It was smooth, recently polished, out of place in a room full of dust and cobwebs. There was no lock, just two small hinges, rusted but intact. She looked back at Clara, who gave her a slight nod. Isabel exhaled, then lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in soft, yellowing cloth, was a small collection of bones, delicate, pale. Incomplete, like time had eaten away the parts it didn't want remembered. A tiny rib cage, a hand no bigger than a curled leaf, a skull the size of her palm. She froze. Something inside her sank into a cold stillness. There was no scream, no sob, just the weight of recognition. Beside the bones lay a bundle of letters, tied with fraying red thread. Clara stepped forward, pulled out the letters, and handed them to Isabel. "Do you want to?" "Yes," Isabel whispered. She sat back on her heels and untied the string. The paper crackled softly as she opened the first envelope. The handwriting was Agnes, sharper than in the journal, but still hers. "Dear Thomas, I don't know where to begin. You left before I did. Maybe that's why everything unraveled. You always said I was too soft, too stubborn. You were right. Ivy fell asleep in my arms that morning. Her lips were blue. I thought it was the cold, but she wasn't breathing. I shook her, I screamed, I prayed. I even tried to warm her with my body. Nothing worked." Isabel's throat tightened. She turned the page. "I didn't call anyone for hours. I just held her, rocked her. I thought, if I stayed still enough, if I didn't blink, maybe God would reverse it. Maybe she'd open her eyes." She didn't, but something else happened. That night, I heard her crying again. I followed the sound, and there she was, in the crib, her back to me. I thought I'd lost my mind, but it kept happening. Every night, her voice, her smell, her breath on my neck. I couldn't tell anyone, not even Isabel. She was so young, so quiet after that, like something in her knew. Isabel looked up at Clara, whose lips were trembling. The attic suddenly felt colder. She turned to the next letter. I started doing things. Small things. Leaving milk out for Ivy, sleeping in the nursery, talking to her through the walls. I didn't think it was wrong. I thought I was being a good mother, the kind who wouldn't abandon her child, even in death. The next page was stained with something, possibly tears. Isabel would ask questions. Why the room stayed locked, why I sang lullabies to no one. She was always watching me. I know I scared her, but what else could I do? I lost one daughter. I couldn't lose both. Isabel blinked, vision blurring. There were more letters. She read them slowly, gently, like touching the exposed nerves of a wound that never healed. Each one built the same truth. Ivy had died by accident, an unnoticed fever, a missed breath, a mother too exhausted to wake in time. Agnes had panicked, hidden the death. Then, unable to cope, she'd convinced herself that Ivy hadn't truly gone, and somehow, Isabel had grown up beside that madness, inside it. She turned to the last letter. The handwriting was shakier than the rest, the words less structured, more like a whisper than a message. "Forgive me. Love her better than I did." Isabel clutched the paper, holding it against her chest like a lifeline. The attic was quiet again. Even the house seemed to pause. Jonah stepped forward. He crouched beside her and gently rested his hand on the cloth holding the bones. "I think she was waiting for this," he said softly. "For you to see her, both of them." Clara sat beside them, brushing dust from her knees. "What will you do?" "I'll bury her properly," Isabel said. "Somewhere real, somewhere she can rest." Clara nodded. "And you?" "I don't know yet," Isabel whispered. "But I think I need to forgive her, not for her sake, for mine." They sat there in silence, surrounded by the past. 3 generations of women tangled in grief, guilt, and love. Later that evening, they drove to the edge of town, to a quiet green cemetery by the woods. Isabel had already called ahead, arranged a small, unmarked plot. She carried the box herself, wrapped in new cloth, They said nothing during the burial. There were no prayers, no speeches, just Jonah placing a small carved stone above the earth. One word, Ivy. The wind stirred the trees and the light dimmed to gold. Isabel stood with her hands in her coat pockets, watching the ground settle. Then she whispered, "Good night, Ivy." As they walked back to the car, she glanced toward the sky. The clouds had parted slightly, letting one clear ray of light shine through. For the first time in a long, long time, the weight in her chest began to lift. And in her mind, the house on Waverly Street grew quieter. Not because it had nothing left to say, but because it had finally been heard. Shall I continue with Chapter 10, The Quiet That Remains? The decision to sell the house came quietly, without ceremony. Isabel didn't write a list of pros and cons. She didn't consult a realtor right away. She simply woke one morning, sat at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched coffee, and said aloud, "It's time." Jonah, seated across from her with a spoon in his cereal, looked up and nodded like he already knew. The house had shifted in recent days. The creaks in the floor had softened. The air no longer felt pressed down by something unseen. Ivy had been buried properly. The letters were tucked away, read and acknowledged. Agnes' portrait, once looming from the hallway, had been taken down. And Isabel, though still tired, no longer carried herself like she was waiting for something to end. They packed slowly over the next 2 weeks. Isabel worked room by room, sorting, discarding, keeping only what still had meaning. Jonah helped without being asked. Clara came by every few days with boxes and gentle reminders to take breaks. The guest room was the last to be cleared. Isabel waited until the night before the final day. She told Jonah she needed to sleep there just once. He didn't argue. He simply hugged her, then went back to organizing the bookshelves in the front room. That night, Isabel changed the sheets in the nursery. The crib was already gone, donated to a local women's shelter, but she kept the rocking chair and the tiny bookshelf. She lit a single candle and lay down on the old mattress with the window cracked open. The breeze was warm. The smell of apples drifted in from the yard. Summer was coming. She stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the quiet. "Ivy," she whispered into the dark, "I wish I had known you." Her voice didn't break. It was steady, grieving but not drowning. "And I'm sorry it took me this long to say your name." She closed her eyes. "I'm letting go now." The silence in the room felt full, not empty, like someone had been waiting to be released and finally was. She drifted to sleep. For the first time in that house, her dreams were soft. When morning came, the light in the nursery was pale gold. She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and looked around the nearly bare room. It felt smaller now, ordinary, just 4 walls, no whispers, no shadows. Downstairs, Jonah had made toast. He handed her a mug of coffee, then asked, "Are we okay now?" She looked at him, really looked. His eyes were steadier than they'd been in weeks. He had changed too, grown into something stronger, more rooted. "We're okay," she said. They carried the last of the boxes to the porch. The moving van had already come and gone. All that remained were 2 overnight bags and a folder of papers. Clara waited in the car parked at the curb, engine humming. Isabel stood on the front steps of 421 Waverly Street one last time. She looked at the windows, the door, the porch that once seemed to sag under the weight of memory. It looked straight now, still, not like it had forgotten, just like it no longer needed to hold on. She didn't cry. She only smiled faintly, placed her keys in the mailbox as arranged, and turned toward the street. As she climbed into the car, Jonah glanced back. "Do you think someone else will feel it?" he asked. "No," Isabel said. "The house did what it had to. It kept the story until someone could finish it." They drove away without fanfare. The house on Waverly Street stood quiet, not waiting, just at rest. And in that stillness, something like peace bloomed.